Interoperability, interchangeability, and joint. Those words are all there in describing exactly how the F-35, an international plane that Canada bought in from the beginning. Interoperability.
Locked in a trade fight with Donald Trump, you may have heard that the Carney government is reconsidering its multi-billion-dollar purchase of American F-35 fighter jets.
What happens when one of America's closest allies quietly says no, and Washington does not take it lightly? That is where this story really begins. Not with fighter jets, not with contracts, but with a moment that shook the balance inside one of the West's closest defense partnerships. Canada, a country long tied into the US-led air defense system, suddenly showed signs that it might step outside the script. And just like that, what looked like a normal military upgrade turned into something far bigger. This was supposed to be simple. Replace Canada's old CF-18 Hornets with a modern fifth-generation jet, lock smoothly into NATO and NORAD, and move forward without drama. That was the plan. But behind closed doors, the story changed. As Ottawa started taking a harder look at its massive 88-aircraft F-35 deal worth around $14 billion and tied deeply to decades of military integration with the United States, another name started gaining attention in the background: Sweden's JAS-39 Gripen. And that one possible shift was enough to send a shock through the relationship, turning a procurement debate into a power struggle, a diplomatic warning, and a much bigger question nobody can ignore. When alliances share the skies, who really controls them? Before we go deeper, take a second to like the video and subscribe, because most people who watch these videos still are not subscribed. At first, the pressure from Washington was quiet. It came wrapped in careful words like cooperation, interoperability, and shared defense responsibility. But that softer tone did not last. As Sweden's Gripen started becoming a real option for Canada, the message grew sharper and far more serious. Soon, the warning was no longer subtle. It became direct. If Canada backed away from the F-35, the entire balance inside NORAD could be affected, and the United States might even need to expand its fighter presence in Canadian airspace to cover any gaps. That was not just about aircraft anymore. That touched something much deeper: Canada's sovereignty itself. This was not media hype or political drama blown out of proportion. It was a clear sign that one defense purchase could shake an air defense system that has protected North America for nearly 70 years. NORAD works because both countries are deeply connected, with the nearest aircraft responding to danger no matter where the border is. And that kind of system depends on shared platforms, shared technology, and seamless coordination. Exactly the kind of integration the F-35 was built to strengthen. But this debate did not unfold in isolation. It came at the same time trade tensions were rising between Canada and the United States, with tariff threats adding even more pressure to an already sensitive decision. Suddenly, defense was no longer separate from politics or economics. It became obvious that military contracts could also become tools of leverage in a much bigger geopolitical struggle. Inside Canada, the argument has grown even more intense, because this is not only about security, it is also about money, jobs, and control over national industry. Saab's promise to bring production into Canada and support thousands of local jobs gave the Gripen bid a powerful economic appeal, turning the fighter program from a simple purchase into a possible long-term investment in Canada's own future. But critics warn that walking away from the F-35 could come with real risks, from weaker interoperability with allies to possible capability gaps in high-end conflict, where stealth, sensors, and deep integration can decide the outcome. Some even argue that such a move could weaken Canada's standing inside both NATO and NORAD, especially in the Arctic, where close coordination with the United States is not optional, it is essential. And that Arctic dimension is not some distant theory. It is real, it is growing, and it could shape everything that comes next. Before we go further, take a second to like the video and subscribe, because a huge number of viewers still watch without subscribing. This issue sits at the heart of Canada's defense strategy, because Canada must protect the second largest airspace on Earth, and much of it is vast, isolated, freezing, and incredibly hard to defend. In those remote northern regions, there are few bases, long distances, and very little room for delay, which means response time can be the difference between stopping a threat early or letting it move deeper toward North American airspace. That urgency has only grown as Russian bomber patrols near the continent have become more frequent in recent years, putting more pressure on Canada to have fighters that can launch fast, fly far, and stay ready under brutal conditions. And that is where the real divide between the F-35 and the Gripen starts to matter. In a place like Canada, a fighter cannot just be advanced on paper. It must survive extreme cold, operate far from major support hubs, and remain available even when supply lines are stretched or disrupted. Some defense planners worry that the F-35, for all its power and cutting-edge technology, could face limits in exactly those kinds of harsh scenarios, especially if a major conflict damages the support systems it depends on. Because the F-35 was designed for a highly connected battlespace, where satellites, data links, sensors, and centralized maintenance all work together to give pilots incredible awareness and coordination. But the Gripen was built with a different idea in mind. It assumes that in war, those systems may break down, communications may be hit, and air forces may have to fight from rough highways, remote strips, and improvised bases. So this is not simply a contest between a better jet and a weaker one. It is a choice between two very different military philosophies. One tries to dominate through deep integration and high-end capability. The other tries to survive and keep fighting through flexibility, resilience, and independence. And that is exactly Canada's dilemma. Because the real question is not which aircraft is better in every situation, but which one fits Canada's geography, strategic needs, and political reality more effectively. Even then, true independence is not fully possible inside NORAD, because no matter which fighter Canada chooses, it will still be operating inside a wider defense network shaped heavily by American systems, structures, and command. So the choice is not total freedom versus total dependence. It is really about how much control Canada can hold inside a system where everything is connected. That is the nuance many public debates miss. This is not a simple black and white decision. It is a balancing act filled with trade-offs, where every strength brings a weakness and every solution creates a new risk. And that is why this story has become so important, because what made it explosive was not just the aircraft themselves, but the powerful reaction their comparisons suddenly triggered. Because the warnings from Washington were never just about stealth, radar, or what one jet could do better than another. They were really about protecting a system that has shaped how Allied air forces work together for decades. A system built on shared aircraft, shared data, shared technology, and most importantly, shared control. The moment Canada hinted that it might step even partly outside that structure, the reaction came fast. And that tells you something important. In an alliance built on predictability, even a small shift can send shockwaves much farther than anyone expected. That is why this story quickly grew beyond just Ottawa and Washington. Other countries started watching closely, not because they were ready to make the same move, but because this situation exposed a bigger question about the future of alliances themselves. In today's world, power is no longer only about bombs, jets, and military muscle. It is also about who controls the software, who owns the data, who manages the supply chains, and who holds the systems together behind the scenes long after the deal is signed. And that is what makes this story so much bigger than fighter jets. Canada is not rejecting the United States, and it is not walking away from cooperation. What Canada seems to be asking for is something more balanced, a relationship where partnership does not automatically mean dependence, and where a country can still protect its own national interests without damaging collective security. But that balance is extremely hard to find, because the pressure behind this debate comes from forces much larger than one contract or one aircraft. It comes from geopolitics, from technology, from economics, and from a world where nations are becoming more connected and more dependent at the exact same time. So as this story continues to unfold, the consequences could reach far beyond Canada's borders, shaping not only how allies buy their weapons, but how they define trust, control, and independence inside modern military partnerships. And that leaves one powerful question hanging over everything, a question no official statement has truly answered yet. Now, the bigger question is impossible to ignore. If Canada shows it can push back, change the terms, and still stay a trusted ally, Will other countries start thinking they can do the same? Or will that reveal how little room this system really has before the pressure starts tearing at it from the inside? And while that defense debate is already raising serious questions, Canada is now facing another kind of pressure, this time on trade. Uncertainty is growing, but officials in Ottawa are trying to calm the situation and stop the narrative from spiraling. Canada's Trade Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, pushed back against talk that the United States and Mexico could move forward without Canada, saying that is not a real concern right now. Instead, he pointed to continued cooperation and a shared understanding that the future of North American trade still depends on all three countries working inside one common framework. He stressed that Mexico remains committed to the three-country deal, better known as CUSMA, and that this agreement still stands at the center of regional trade talks, even as each country tries to protect its own interests. At the same time, he admitted that not every issue can be solved in a three-way room. Some problems, he said, are better handled one country at a time, through direct talks that later feed back into the larger review. That mix of bilateral and trilateral diplomacy has now become one of the defining features of these negotiations, because aligning three major economies under growing political pressure was never going to be simple.
But momentum has clearly not been equal. The United States and Mexico have already started formal talks ahead of the July deadline for CUSMA's scheduled review, while signals from Washington suggest Canada has not moved at the same speed. And that gap has added more unease at a moment when the agreement is approaching a major turning point, one where each country must decide whether to renew it for another 16 years, walk away from it completely, or let it fall into a long review process that could drag on for as much as a decade. Canada's exact position is still not fully clear. LeBlanc has offered broad reassurance, saying talks with U.S. officials are productive and noticeably better than they were last October, when negotiations were suddenly halted under President Donald Trump. That change in tone suggests there is still room for progress, but nobody should pretend the road ahead is easy. Ottawa is also trying to strengthen its position beyond Washington, sending a trade mission to Mexico and preparing for a Mexican delegation expected in May, a sign that Canada is working on multiple fronts to keep the relationship stable. And perhaps most interesting of all, wider geopolitical tensions do not seem to be poisoning these talks, at least not yet. Canada's position on the Iran conflict could have created new friction, but LeBlanc said it has not become a problem in trade discussions, which is a positive sign that economic talks are still being kept separate from outside political disputes. In a region already under strain from shifting alliances, rising pressure, and competing national interests, that separation may turn out to be one of the few things holding the whole structure together.
At the same time, Canada is also dealing with serious problems inside its own borders, and one of the biggest is the trade barriers that still exist between provinces and territories. These old obstacles continue to block the smooth movement of goods, services, and workers across the country, even after years of promises to fix them. Dominic LeBlanc met with regional leaders in Ottawa to push this issue forward, but while some progress has been made, major gaps still remain, especially in labor mobility, where different rules, licenses, and certifications make it hard for skilled workers to move from one region to another. And all of this is happening while Canada's larger trade relationship with the United States grows even more uncertain under the second Trump administration. Tariffs, harsh rhetoric, and even talk of annexation have added a level of instability that was simply not there before. Trump's public attacks on CUSMA, calling it outdated and possibly unnecessary, have only made the future more uncertain, raising a bigger question. Will this agreement survive, or will it be replaced by something completely different? One idea now being discussed is a major shift away from one three-country trade deal towards separate bilateral deals between the United States and each of its neighbors. Supporters say that could make talks easier, but for Canada, it could also bring new risks, because Ottawa has long depended on a united North American framework to keep balance in its trade relationship with Washington. At the same time, Canada is trying to strengthen its own domestic economy by expanding agreements between federal, provincial, and territorial governments to reduce internal trade barriers and make it easier for businesses to operate nationwide.
Recent efforts have focused especially on services, which remain divided and difficult to navigate, particularly for industries that depend on workers being able to move freely across the country. Even so, many major categories are still excluded, including food, live animals, alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, and plants, meaning some of the most important parts of the economy still face restrictions. Business groups argue that removing these barriers could unlock major growth, help companies expand faster, and give consumers lower prices and more choices. And that is what makes this moment so important. Canada is not facing just one challenge, but many at once, with trade policy, politics, and economic strategy all colliding at the same time. Every move now carries consequences far beyond the immediate headline. If you found this deep dive valuable, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories on global strategy, trade, and the forces shaping the future. The next few years will be critical, and we will be here to cover every major development. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.